How to be peaceful in difficult times, is that right? Well, how to be difficult in unpeaceful times. I think it's difficult any time. Let me start first with a little prayer. It's expressing two things. The first two lines is for anyone of us in the room who already kind of identifies with being a Buddhist and uses the Buddhist tools. And just reminding us of that. And the second two lines are just stating our purpose, we might say, but the Tibetans would say, setting our motivation for why we're here together. Is to listen to these ideas coming from the Buddha about the mind, really. I mean, that's Buddha's expertise. How to work with our mind, how to deal with life, basically. How to navigate, life, make the most of it, develop. And for the Buddha, that means developing our amazing potential to be less neurotic, less depressed, less angry, less fearful, more kind, more wise, more compassionate. That's really what the Buddhist teachings are about when it comes down to it. So for this reason, we think we're listening, sitting here, listening together. And that includes me. I'm listening too, I promise. Sangye charang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen yipe sonam ki jola penches sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognam la janchu baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chanyen yipe sonam ki jola penches sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognam la Janchu baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chanyen gipa sonam ki, jola penche sangye drupa shok. So one of the things, the Buddha's teachings, do we need the door open? Come on, keep us cozy. The Buddhist teachings really are about the mind. Like I said, we mightn't think of these words if we think Buddhism, because we think Buddhism, we think kind of holy, we think spiritual, we think of the word spirit, the soul, this kind of business, But Buddha doesn't use those words at all. He uses the word mind. And it really is not a joke to say that Buddhism, that Buddha's expertise is the mind, Which is surprising to us. And I think in our culture, these days, I say it this way because I think it's really true. We, in our Judeo-Christian culture, we track ourselves back through, back to the Greeks, and we love the Greeks, But we know nothing about India, nothing about the Indians. And these days, I always say this one. I often start with this one, so I find it very, very fascinating. As Dalai Lama said years ago, I think somewhere I noticed, he said, that it's actually these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. I mean, that might surprise us. We probably thought it was Freud, a couple of years ago. 3,000, more than that. So, and also what we were surprised about, it's only really now coming out more and more that books are being published, especially since it's Holiness of Dalai Lama and all these amazing talks with Western scientists and Western thinkers. It's really becoming evident to us how astonishing these amazing Buddhist thinkers and even the Hindu thinkers before him, the Buddha came out of that tradition. There's extensive, vast literature about the nature of mind, in fact about the nature of the universe. It's a vast body of knowledge, Buddhism, But the essence of it is the mind. The center of it is the mind, consciousness. And the Buddha's key point, is that we can change our mind. It sounds almost so silly, it's embarrassing. What do you mean change our mind? We know that. But somehow we can see in our lives we don't. So, and so what it means if we can change our mind, and changing our mind meaning that we can lessen the neuroses and grow the goodness, keeping it in the most simple way. He actually says far more than that. The word Buddha in Tibetan Sangye expresses perfectly this potential. And this is the essence of what Buddhism is. The goal tells us what the job is. And the goal to become a Sangye, Sang means, the etymology of this word is very tasty. Sang implies the utter eradication from our own mind, our consciousness, of all neuroses, all ego, all fears, all the nonsense. This is very shocking to us. This is quite a radical concept. Nothing like that. There's no equivalent of this view in modern psychology. And not only that, Gye implies we can develop to perfection all the other stuff in our mind, all the goodness, the wisdom, the clarity. And this is expressing the point, the findings of the Buddha about the nature of our mind. It's actually very empowering. So even forget about developing that to perfection. That takes time. but it implies we're not set in stone. So it's very interesting, isn't it? That just recently, I mean, the late 20th century, one other Canadian scientist said that neuroplasticity, the greatest finding of the 20th century, that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. Well, this is just expressing what Buddha's saying, you know. So what's the implication of this? The words are simple enough. The implication is that we can learn to reinterpret our life. We can learn to reinterpret things. And what does that mean? So speaking simply, we know ourselves. We spend our lives, you know, trying to manipulate the outside world to get it to be just so that we can be happy. That's how we spend our lives. Sentient beings, all of them, ants, dogs, monkeys do the same. And what's that based? What assumption is that based on? That happiness comes from the outside, that the objects of the senses, the external world. This is just taken for granted by all of us. No one has to teach us this. It's utterly spontaneous, utterly instinctive. And then the implication of that is that we spend our lives avoiding all the things on the outside that would cause suffering, because we all want happiness and we all don't want suffering. One way of framing the entirety of Buddha's view, the entirety of his worldview, his path, it's in terms of how to find happiness and stop suffering. In fact, he says what he has found himself, and this is what he presents, all his methodology, is his method for how to get happiness and stop suffering. It's one way of framing all of the Buddha's teachings. And the method for him isn't to manipulate the outside world to get it just so. He says you can do that, no problem, but it won't bring you happiness. It won't stop your suffering. It's to change your mind, to see things differently. This is really how it's as simple as that, but it is the most difficult job we'll ever do. So why is that? Because these words we can hear, it's not complex. Well, there are many things conspiring against our doing this job, and this is why it is so difficult for us, even though the words are simple. Well, the first one is that we are in fact addicted to believing happiness comes from out there and suffering comes from out there. Absolutely addicted. And the two main states of mind that are expressing this are these simple, cute words that Buddha uses for some of the neuroses and the essential neuroses, the essential unhappy states of mind, the essential delusions that he would pinpoint as the causes of our problem. And one is called attachment and one is called aversion. And there's this intimate relationship between these. Now, these words are simple, and we have very different definitions of them, so we need to be clear what Buddha means by them. So he divides all those contents of our mind into the bunch of neuroses and ridiculous ones, all the fear-based, ego-based nonsense that are the source of our pain, that he says we can get rid of. And then we have all the valid, positive, optimistic, virtuous, reasonable states of mind that are the source of our happiness. So right there, we're seeing it. We think it's out there, there's a source of happiness and suffering. No, he says it's here. And the causes of the suffering in here, these neurotic states of mind, these unhappy states of mind, these delusions, these misconceptions, there are many synonyms for them. They're linked to this business of looking for it out there. So attachment's job is this multifaceted, kind of deeply instinctive, primordially deep, wrong state of mind. Buddha says misconception, deeply ingrained from much practice, that just assumes I must get everything I want every second, which means to make sure everything out there is exactly as I like it, because then I will get happy. And it's not being mean. We all want happiness. Buddha never argues with this, not for a second. He says our methods are completely wacky. So he says that what he's found is by giving up attachment, then you solve the problem. And these words are so simple, but this is the hardest job we'll ever do. As loving as he says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. We'll never begin to comprehend it until we start working deeply inside, building it up, understanding internally. So the major thing that prevents us from even wanting to look into our mind, because we think that's pretty irrelevant. I'm spending all my life looking at the outside world. That's where happiness is. That's where suffering is. So we put all our energy into that. And what attachment's job is to drive us, is this neurotic state of mind that drives us to look for the delicious things, convinced that when we get them, we'll get happy. And then when we don't get them, or when we get them and they disappear, aversion arises, the other state of mind. As Lama Zopa says, aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So these are just so normal to us that I think in our psychology we wouldn't even have simple, cute words like this, We don't go to our therapist, we've got attachment. They'll laugh at you, say, go home, it's normal, And if you've got aversion, that's just ordinary aversion, like irritation, annoyance, upset, they laugh at you again, go home and relax. But if it's called anger and rage or profound depression, then they might listen. So the other thing conspiring against us doing this job is that we don't notice what's going on in here until it's way too late. You know? This is really, really true. I use a really simple kind of dumb analogy. It's as if you've never heard of mechanics for your car. You've never heard of maintenance. So you drive your car until eventually 120 miles an hour on the motorway, you discover your wheels are falling off. Oh, what should I do? We all know that's insanity. We all know there are methods. Most people's wheels don't fall off because we have maintenance. And such a cliche, but it's so profound. We do not have that approach to our mind. We wait until the wheels fall off before we then have to desperately try and do something, and often it's too late. You want to kill yourself or kill your boyfriend, you know, because we're not paying attention in here. So these attachment and anger are going all the time. And the Buddha's view is contrary to ours. He says these are the main source of the problem, but we think they're just the mere response to the ugly or delicious world. We've got it exactly the opposite. We think when I see a delicious cake, then I get attached and excited, and that's the cause of my happiness. And you see the ugly cake, then I get angry and upset, and that's the cause of my suffering. It is the absolute opposite. The states of mind are in here already. Totally instinctive, totally primordial. We're not utterly unconscious of them. We're not taught them. This, of course, is implying Buddha's view, which is interesting from this point alone, that we come fully programmed with this stuff. Not from mummy and daddy and grandma and grandpa and the monkeys, because this is our own mind, but from our own tendency to have these qualities, to have these states of mind. They're totally instinctive. They're our own. So we come programmed already, and we just continue to follow them. So the Buddha's job is that we have to almost reverse the energy of this bomb and learn to pay attention in here and change here. Nothing wrong with changing out there. Buddha says if you can change something, please change it. If you can stop your crazy husband being mean to you, if you can make the weather more beautiful, if you can make the pain go away, if you can go ahead and do it, no problem. If you can make the problem go away, if you can make the dramas and the suffering, the things that we can't bear, go away, fantastic, go for it. But what if you can't? And we know there's much we cannot change out there. And that's why we go crazy. That's why we go mad. We bash our heads against brick walls, utterly convinced that it's the ugly person, the mean thing, the bad weather, the event. And this is so kind of normal that it seems odd to even say it, you know. It's just normal to want things to be nice. It's just normal to feel unhappy if someone punches you in the nose. What's the problem with that, we think? That's normal. Well, yeah, it's normal insofar as we're all like that. But the Buddha, in his own amazing wisdom from the depths of his own mind, has found it's a lot easier to change the response to it, your own mind, then you solve the problem. So in other words, even if you did some semblance of inner work using Buddha's techniques, don't even wait till you've got this amazing single-pointed concentration, as they call it, this incredible technique that actually the Hindus invented. Buddha came along and went as far as he could go in that system, and then he diverged in his own direction in relation to his own findings about the nature of self. But he got so much already from what was already existing. They are the ones who created this technique, this amazing, sophisticated psychological skill that enables us to go to completely discipline the grosser levels of our sensory and conceptual consciousness, totally harness it and access more subtle levels of our mind, so that we can really do this job in the long term of unpacking and unraveling the contents in here, this seeming chaos in here, and get utter control over it, and eventually, long term, rid the mind of all the rubbish and grow all the goodness. It's a really intense, full-on, focused, disciplined, amazing job to be done, and it's internal. And even that idea is very unusual for us. In modern psychology, in modern science, psychology, I think, is on the lowest of the rungs. It's the least respected, I think, because we don't trust the mind. We don't trust, it's too subjective. We want external things and microscopes. We don't have really, it seems to me we don't seem to have really coherent, agreed upon views about mind, consciousness, what it is, what it's not, and so on, you know. That happens to be Buddha's expertise. It's kind of interesting. So as far as he's concerned, the mind is not physical. This is a crucial point. If you want to even understand Buddhism, even intellectually, you need to take that hypothesis. Second, it is not the handiwork of a creator or your parents, and that's the biggest shock to us. Because in both cases, we think someone else made us, not for the Buddha. our consciousness existed before and will continue. This is a fundamental finding of the Buddha, and anyone after a couple of years accomplishing single point of concentration can prove this for themselves, because you access this subtle level of your mind, and then that level of your mind can cognize phenomena the grosser level can't, which is, say, past lives, future lives, the minds of others, etc., etc. This is all part of the Buddha's view, Buddha's findings. So this mind of ours is not physical. It's got these far more subtle levels, far more powerful long-term potential. Is it the handiwork of someone else? It is not set in stone and can be known. That's the job of being a Buddhist. Being your own therapist, as Laviashi puts it. So it's the hardest job we'll ever do because we're not used to doing it, because we're totally programmed with the opposite view. And then because of that, because we spend all our attention on the outside world trying to get it to be just so, this is utterly primordially natural for all beings. Then because of that, we only really notice what's going on in here when it's screaming and loud and unbearable. And then because we think it's the brain anyway, and I'm being rude about neuroscience, because we think it's the brain, then we have to take a pill, because you have to deal with it physically. Nothing wrong with taking pills. But the Buddha's view is, the Buddha's method is becoming familiar with it. So even some semblance, I'm saying, even some semblance of this approach in your daily life, this willingness, this wish, this confident willingness to look into your mind and to know it. It's not mysterious. You don't have to close your eyes and find it out. Buddha's got his own view of the mind, so you use that one as your basis for interpreting what is in here. You don't just put your hands on the piano and hope that somehow you'll sort out what Bach means. No, he's written it down very nicely on a piece of paper, and you learn his theories and you replicate it. Then you can play the piano. The Buddha's view of the mind is like that, a very precise presentation of the way the mind works. So one learns that, and then one learns the skill to investigate the mind, and they're the basic tools that you'd use to be your own therapist. So some semblance of skill at doing this every day, a bit of meditation in the morning, a bit of clarity, a bit of focus, different kinds of techniques, and then this willingness to observe what's happening in here, rather than not just the outside. You don't not notice the outside. You must notice what the cars are doing on the freeway. You'll get crash otherwise. But you're also, because of habit from the practice, you're learning to recognize what's in here before you want to murder the next door, the guy in front of you. And then you start to change it, to reconfigure your crazy thoughts. Because right now we know, from the second we wake up in the morning until the second we go to sleep, there's constant thoughts here. Even in modern psychology, they say there's like 1,000 thoughts a second. Buddha agrees with that. This is, as we call it, unconscious. And we all know it's just kind of chaotic naturally. We just think it's natural. When you try to go to sleep one night, you think you're going crazy, don't we? Well, that's happening all the time. It's just that when we're in daily life, we're busy with the outside. We just don't pay attention until it starts raging loudly. But that's when it's too late. That's the wheels falling off. So Buddha gives us this skill to learn to focus. Most of us won't get that much focus. You've got to be really, together and really already well practiced and disciplined and go to a very silent, particular place to get to do it, to accomplish some single point of concentration. It could take several years. But we can train ourselves in that ability to at least step out of our head for a few minutes and have the courage to notice our own thoughts. And then in our daily life, we become more familiar with them. And then we can start to hear the angry thoughts and the jealous thoughts and the crazy thoughts and the anxious thoughts before they vomit out the mouth. Or before you're inert in bed one morning and can't get out because of profound depression. So the obstacles to our doing this job are because we're believing the outside is the cause. That therefore causes us not to notice what's happening here until it's too late. They're the main obstacles. And because the habit of this is so intense, we're addicted to this. There's a deep addiction to this attachment. It's a profound addiction. It's got the energy of addiction. Then when we hear these words when we're nice and peaceful, but we check the next time something goes wrong, even just the mean guy on the road, not to mention your husband being mean, not to mention your boss firing you, horrible things happening, then observe how hard it is. So if I'm upset because Fred hurt me, what's wrong, Robina? Well, I'm angry. Tell me about your anger. Well, what I'll do is I'll give you a detailed description of Fred. Well, that's fine to tell me about Fred, Robina. What about your anger? And I'll say, but I just told you about it. No, I didn't. What happened was the anger in my mind, the hurt, the pain, the raging, how dare he do this to me, I don't deserve it, all this story that anger is, not just the feelings, but the conceptual story that informs anger. That's a detailed description of the person. So when we think of suffering, we think of the person. When we think of happiness, we think of the person. We're so addicted to the external. We know we have anger and attachment. We know we have jealousy and anxiety. We know that. But they're the response to these awful things happening. Or they're the why am I happy? Because he was so kind to me. Why are you suffering? Because he was so mean to me. So we know we have them, but we're this innocent victim, we think, of all these external things. So all our energy goes to the outside. These words that we understand, but to not do it takes profound practice, incredible courage, incredible clarity, incredible humility and intelligence. Because everything in us doesn't want to do that. We want to, it appears to us, this is the thing. It's bad enough, as long as everybody says bad enough, that we have the anger, the jealousy, the painful states of mind because of habit. That they cause us to see things in a certain way, that Fred is the cause of my suffering. Bad enough that we see him that way. But he says the worst part is, but this is because of habit, we believe the story. We believe what appears to us. This is how they say in Buddhist psychology. Because of habit. So to do this job is the hardest job we'll ever do. So at least let's start practicing when things are going nicely. Then we can begin to have the courage to do it when things go badly. Because that's when we notice, that's when the wheels fall off. So we must be prepared for the wheels falling off. Or even better, when you do this, as I said, have some semblance of practice every day. I promise you, if you really work fairly reasonably every day on your mind with this attitude and have a decent practice, the wheels will never fall off. And even no matter how bad things are, you'll be able to manage. You'll be able to navigate it. That's true. Without even getting single point concentration, without being a great high yogi or yogini. Every one of us can do that, but it takes courage and discipline. And the point is it's not moralistic. We hear it as kind of, you shouldn't be angry, you must do this. No, Buddha's just being practical. He says it's the anger that's breaking your heart. The anxiety, the fears, the jealousy, the attachment, they are the main source of your pain, not the object. That takes time to see. But having some confidence in that. And I don't care, you don't call yourself a Buddhist, I don't care. Buddha doesn't own this stuff, he's just very good at it, that's all. He's not a creator. He didn't make all this stuff up, he's observed it, he's done it himself. This is his own experience. So he doesn't own it though, he's not a creator. And it's not a question of believing in it, it's a question of trying it. I don't care if you call yourself a Buddhist, do what you like. This is practical, And this is the source of our sanity. This is the source of our happiness. And that's why it's practical, not moralistic. It's for our benefit. We're the beneficiary of this. There's a nice saying that a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So this is a wisdom wing. The nuts and bolts of Buddhist teachings about mind, as well as the nuts and bolts of Buddhist teachings about karma. Maybe we won't touch upon that tonight. We'll certainly go into that in the weekend course. But these are the nuts and bolts of Buddhist teachings, Buddhist views, Buddhist philosophy. About the way the world is, about what happiness is, what suffering is, and why things happen. And they're the tools one uses in order to develop this marvelous potential, our own potential, for our own sake. Then on the basis of this, we can have to develop the compassion wing. Because we're all in the same boat, we realise that then. And then we can be of benefit to others. We can't help ourselves, we can't even help a dog, You've got to do the work in yourself first. And you've got to realise it's for your sake. When it comes to spiritual teachings, we often feel, oh, how can you say it's for your benefit? That sounds very selfish, we say. But this is necessary. It's practical. You understand this. If you want to help people, you walk around the world, you see everybody's unhealthy. People who don't eat properly, they're getting sick. And you say, I must help people. I want to help people get better. Well, what do you have to do first? It's obvious. You have to learn nutrition. That's the wisdom wing. And you have to apply it to yourself. It's clear you can't help anyone with nutrition if you don't know nutrition, which is the wisdom wing, and you don't apply it to yourself. You can't help anyone. You see all these people who can't play tennis. I must help people play tennis. Well, you've got to learn tennis first. Pretty obvious. Well, the same here. You can't help people help the suffering of the world if you can't understand what suffering is and its causes. And we're talking here Buddha's view, his packaging of this, his view of this, his understanding of this. One of his first teaching after he became a Buddha, a Sangye, did the job that he's telling us his methodology is all about. His first teaching it was about suffering. One way of framing, as I said before, one way of framing all of Buddhist teachings is in terms of it being a path of how to get happy, how to stop suffering. That we know. We'd like happiness, please, we don't want suffering, that's pretty clear. Another way of framing it all, okay, in those terms, we can then look at his first teaching, which is called the Four Noble Truths. The four truths for the noble ones, the four facts about life. And this in terms of suffering. There is suffering, there are causes, you can be free of it, and how to do it. That's the essence of Buddha's approach. It's all encapsulated in that particular package. So we need to do the job ourselves first, and we need to have. It's like, they don't say that in Buddhism, but it's like the first part, the wisdom wing is like having compassion for yourself. They don't say it that way, but we get that one. You've got to know your own suffering. You've got to be sick of it, and you've got to, and then that encourages you then to apply methods to stop it. Then when you can see your own, then you're qualified to help others. But to rush off and try and help others first, and you can't even put yourself together, we just make a mess, So if attachment and aversion, these simple, cute words, are kind of central in Buddhist psychology and the source of our own suffering, and therefore the source of why we have others make a mess of our lives, we better know what he means by them. Like I said, the words are simple enough. We don't really use these words in modern psychology. We use fancy terms, don't we? Schizophrenia and bipolar and ADD and IDAD and whatever, isn't it? Buddha used these simple words. He hasn't changed his tune in 2,500 years. In fact, this view of the mind came from the Hindus, so it's probably like 5,000 years old, actually. So, okay, we've got, in this mental consciousness of ours, then, he divides all the contents. It's a very different way of seeing the mind. It's very interesting. Into three categories of states of mind. There's no fourth. And very simple. These categories sound deceptively simple. Negative, positive, and neutral. Sounds weird, Negative, positive, and neutral. We don't talk like that in modern psychology. It sounds like judgmental. So the negative, so-called negative or destructive or disturbing or delusional states of mind, these are all synonyms. And there's a whole range of them. In fact, he's identified precisely, in the Buddhist model of the mind, he's identified 84,000 distinctly different states of mind, neurotic ones. But luckily he narrows them down to three. And he calls them the three poisons. Well, I think the term that we could use these days is very delicious. The three toxic emotions. And there's a very intimate relationship between these three. All the other 84,000, or 83,997, all subsume. Like this elaborate big map, they all subsume to these three. And the three subsume to the one. The root one, the root delusion, as they call it. Delusion is a very excellent word. In many of the languages, I know it's Italian and Greek and Spanish, many languages, there's no real equivalent for this word. It's very arcane and strange, so it sounds a bit sort of intellectual or like religious or abstract. But in English, it's very direct. This is the key function of these unhappy states of mind. Delusion. You know yourself, if you're accused of being delusional, you'd be very offended. Because someone is telling you you're not in sync with reality. And this is absolute bullseye for Buddha's approach to the mind. There are all these dramas in us, the pain in us, the stuff that's the source of our pain, the source of our suffering, are these delusions. Disturbing emotions is another term. They have two main characteristics. They're disturbing to you in the very having of them. And when you're in the throes of them, you're delusional. And that's really quite he's meaning it literally. Of course, there are mild and extreme levels of these, but that's the key characteristic of these states of mind. So these three, the root one, as they call it, is a simple English word. It's just the word ignorance, mat-ripa in Tibetan. But it's got a very colloquial term, ego grasping. All the function of all the unhappy states is that they've got a characteristic of intense, fear-based grasping. They're not just having of them, they're not happy. Very intense grasping. And then they have this other characteristic, to the extent that you're caught up in them, is the extent that you're not in sync with reality. In other words, these states of mind embellish, they exaggerate, they distort. And the stronger they are, the more extreme the embellishment, the more delusional we are. He means it quite literally. So this ego grasping, we don't really have an equivalent in our psychology. Roughly speaking, it's this primordially deep, basically wrong sense of a separate, concrete I, which is fear-based. Mostly it's like a sleeping lion, you know. When it rises up, when you're attacked and offended, that's the pain. This one, this panic-stricken sense of an I that's been offended, been hurt, been insulted. And it is this primordial fear. Most of the time it's like sleeping. It gives rise, therefore, this sense of a separate, bereft I. It naturally gives rise then to this enormous emotional hunger, really, attachment. Not the way we use the word at all. And it's multifaceted. The subtlest, the most primordial level of this attachment, and we're born with all this from practicing it before, Buddha says, it's really simply called dissatisfaction. This deep, deep, deep instinctive belief that I'm not enough, I don't have enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. No matter what I do, it's not enough. No matter how much people praise me, it's not enough. No matter how, thin or fat or whatever I am, it's never enough. It's the default assumption of aching, painful dissatisfaction. Of course, some of us have it far more painfully than others, but this is the energetic level of attachment. So naturally, being dissatisfied, you're hankering after something, and that's where it kicks in the way we understand it, looking for something out there. That's this, very overt, proactive level of attachment. Consciously looking for something, manipulating to get the thing that appears such that if I got it and had contact with it, it would trigger pleasant feelings, which is happiness. And we spend our lives on that. That's attachment. The next level of the hunger is attachment, the dissatisfaction, then the hankering. And then all the time, too, this attachment, and it's doing all of this. It's exaggerating. The stronger the emotional hunger, the stronger it is exaggerating the deliciousness of the person, the cake, the event, the thing. All this is utterly natural, utterly instinctive. And instinct for the Buddha is just simply having practiced it that often that it's second nature. Therefore, we don't notice it and don't question it. And then the manipulating to get it, the utter belief that when I get it, I'll get happy. And then the possessiveness when I get it, especially if it's the person. And then the devastation and disappointment and anger and hurt when it turns out to be a fantasy, because it is by definition a fantasy. Attachment exaggerates. There's some truth in all of this, but this exaggerating, distorting aspect is the one that once we can see it is a revelation for us in understanding what Buddha means in his view of the mind. All that's attachment, and it's like the motor driving us all the time, just naturally. So the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, or it gets what it doesn't want, or once having got what it wants, then because it's not realistic, when it starts to fade, the response is aversion. So that's also multifaceted. The obvious kind of volatile level of aversion is called anger. It's the response when attachment is thwarted. A response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. The response when attachment gets what it doesn't want. And this is, as I said, 1,000 times a day. There's probably not enough times. More than that. It's continuous, unceasing. These are the two main energies driving us. Now, these are the neurotic ones. We're not just only those. We'd be monsters if we were only those. Luckily, our saving grace is the second category of states of mind, called the virtues, the useful states of mind, the valid states of mind, love, compassion, kindness, generosity, intelligence. We've got these, and these are our saving grace. But the tragedy is that, they temper. The good thing is they temper the crazies in us. But the irony is, the more we've got good qualities, the harder it is to see these lot, because they seem so subtle that it's hard to see. It's easier to see a person who shouts and yells. They've got a problem. They're the angry person. But it's much harder to see for a person who doesn't get volatile, both of us having attachment of an angry person like me who's very volatile, another person who's not an angry person, but their aversion is also there, but more subtle. So when they don't get what they want, they also experience aversion, but it's kind of like more subtle. And then it eventually becomes depression because it builds up, because we don't deal with these 1,000 occasions a day. We don't notice what's in here until it's too late, until the wheels fall off. Either you're so depressed you can't get out of bed, or you want to kill somebody. That's when we notice this constant working. And Buddha's view of the mind is very fascinating insofar as every tiny thing we experience through our consciousness, through our senses. As Lama says, it's like we're taking photos all day. And we store those photos in our mind. Everything we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, and think about, and utterly unaware of it. Everything is stored in the mind as memories. So because we don't deal with it when it happens, then it's all building up. So 1,000 occasions of having annoyance, irritation, upset, which are mild versions of aversion when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which you don't pay attention to. Like I said, you don't go to your therapist. Oh, I got annoyed today. That's anger building up. That's the wheels starting to shake. But we don't pay attention. It's not important. But we don't deal with it. So therefore it builds up. There's no choice because everything stays in the mind. The Buddha says everything is staying in the mind. So then eventually all the undealt with stuff, one day the straw that breaks the camel's back. So the Buddha's skill is getting some semblance, as I said, of beginning to step out of our head, even for 5 minutes. We'll do, the course, we'll do a bit of meditation every day, not much, but just learn the technique where we sit to focus the mind. It's a practical thing. So we can begin to learn to step out of our head for 5 minutes, which means we're going to eventually notice what's in our crazy mind, which has been there all the time. And slowly we bring the skill to bear in daily life, where you're not only paying attention to what the husband's doing, what the children are doing, and what the traffic's doing, but you're also now beginning the skill to notice. We'd all do this to some extent, but we're learning this as a real skill. We want to catch what's arising in here before the wheels fall off, so we can do what? Not just let it stay there, but you can deal with it, argue with it. Use your wise, kind, compassionate, valid thoughts to argue with the ridiculous ones. That's practice every day. Nothing mystical. It's just full-on psychology. That's being a Buddhist. But like I said, Buddha doesn't own this. He's not a creator. He didn't make this up. He's found it to be so. He just seems to be an expert at it, I would suggest. That's all. And this is the key to success for him. This is it. Change your mind. Then no matter how bad things get. So we know now, when things go wrong, we wear our hearts on our sleeves. Especially when it's a serious thing that's gone wrong. I mean, it's obvious to anyone, our friends, when the husband left them, or something traumatic happened. We show it nakedly because we can't possibly hide it because we don't know how to deal with it. And that's why we are desperate for someone to help us. We'll turn to anyone when we're having difficult times because we don't know how to deal with it ourselves. So whereas if you're working on your mind every day, being your own therapist to some degree, having this confidence that this is your mind, they're your thoughts, you can work with it no matter what, step by baby step. And you mightn't have seen a friend for 10 years, and maybe your husband left you yesterday. Hello, Robina, how are you, darling? I'm really well. How are you, Mary? They would never need to know you've got a problem. Not because you're hiding anything, but because you're being your own therapist, because you're growing up internally, because you're taking responsibility, and you know what's happening in your mind. You know how to interpret it, how to understand it, how to go deep into it, and we're not afraid of it. That's being a Buddhist. Any questions? Anybody have any questions? Keeping track of time. What the time is. I don't know. Any questions, people? Have I got a clock? Oh, look at that. Okay. It's only 40 minutes. I'll talk for 40 minutes. Now it's your turn. Come on, ask me some questions. Any old question, I don't mind. Just start the ball rolling, somebody. I always find when we start talking, that all the best, stuff comes out. What we really want to know. Yes.
Yeah, the thing that always confuses me is that I really hold to this concept that if if I've become really disenchanted and suffering a lot of aversion in a situation, that it must mean there's something wrong with the situation, that I've sort of outgrown it, or that these are all cues that I should actually move to something better, and then everything will start to flow. And
No, I understand. There's nothing wrong with that either. There's no contradiction. This is not as if you only ever change your mind. It doesn't mean you sit there, and you wear your nappies since you're 1 year old and never change your nappies. You can grow out of nappies and go to different things. So you change all the time. Yes, there's no contradiction. I'm emphasising the internal job. When we do that job, then we're going to recognise exactly when it's time to leave that relationship, when it's time to leave that job, when it's time to do this. We'll have the wisdom and the intelligence to do it for the right reason, not out of panic and fear and running up and down like a yo-yo, So that's no contradiction. We do exist in this outside world, and it is appropriate to manipulate and work with the outside world. But the key to success in knowing what to change and when to move is knowing this one. That's the point. Right now, because we only emphasise the outside, and then we get this extreme aversion for something, then we run away for the wrong reason. We change it for the wrong reason. So we're just going from pillar to post, looking for the nice thing. And we're never looking in the right direction. So there's no contradiction. But the basis of changing is a valid one now, because you've got some inner wisdom. So and that's where I joke and say, it's not a joke. I think the typical number that's accepted in the world, that 40% of all women who get murdered are murdered by the bloke in the same bed. And this is not about men or women. It's just showing our insane minds, showing that we do not realise what is going on in here. You're living in hell, in a nightmarish relationship where you're both suffering and both crazy. Do you understand? But you go back like a moth to a flame, because we not only don't know we can change the situation, we don't even know we can change our mind. So that's how we mostly live our lives, like in torment. Or we keep running away because we can't handle it, but we'll never find anything. So when we know we can change our mind, we have more sanity than any intelligent person with some semblance of self-respect, which we don't have. We would leave that crazy relationship before they killed us. But this is our tragedy. We don't. Do you understand? So it's intelligent to leave. Nothing wrong with that. Part of the thing, I suppose, is our culture. It's wrong to divorce. It's wrong. It should be forever. I mean, the Buddhist view, that's silly. Things run out. Relationships might have a 5-year, life on it. That's it. Time to go. Bye, baby. Out of here. But for the right reason. That's incredibly important. I mean, the irony is we totally believe the outside world is the cause of our happiness and suffering, but there we are, hating our job and hating our house and hating our husband and hating everything else, but terrified to even not change our mind and don't know how to change even the thing. So it's kind of ironic. We're wanting it to be the cause of our happiness. We're all good at suffering, but we can't change anything. I mean, we'll go mad. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. So sensible. Run away, babe. For the good reason, though. For the right reason. It's a good point. Yeah. What else, people? Something?
I asked something you said about as the virtuous emotions
Yes.
build, the wisdom, the generosity.
That's right. Yes.
You said about the negative emotions. There's still, I think you were saying that there was still subtle, that the negative emotions become more and more subtle. So is it like the more the positive qualities are developed, is there more also subtle recognition of the
God,
subtle?
yes, absolutely, that's right. That's it.
Could say
Yes.
something a little bit
A bit more about that. Absolutely,
about
the process.
subtlety of
Yeah,
the
exactly,
process.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you can try and imagine, I mean, we can't imagine the end result. As I said, Sangye in Tibetan of the Sanskrit of the Tibetan equivalent of the Sanskrit word. Well, this person called Buddha says he accomplished this. So, if we could, I'll try and just, okay, sorry. If we can imagine, I mean, the Buddha's view is when you've achieved all the rid mind of all the rubbish and grown all the goodness, sounds simple enough, but if you can imagine what you would be like when you had accomplished that, it's not possible for us. It's insanity. It's insanity. So even forget that, but even some level of ability from having got single point of concentration and from subduing your mind, you can't even conceive of how we'd be. The brilliance of it. So having single point of concentration is an amazing technique the Hindus invented, which the Buddha is a central technique in Buddhism still. You even some semblance of that concentration would mean you've got unbelievable and effortless control to a subtlest degree of the chaos in here. It wouldn't be chaos. Now this is inconceivable for us. Do you understand what I'm saying? We can't have there's no view like that in our psychology, that you could have such clarity that you'd wake up every day from having practiced this technique and having developed ethics and morality and goodness and discipline and doing this job every day, that you'd know your mind to a really subtle degree. You'd know every single tiny thought arising. You'd be in effortless control. You'd be completely subdued. The delusions would be so subdued, and you'd be completely oneness with your virtue and your goodness. That's how you'd be even a little bit of progress. And we don't think that way. We just think the chaos is normal. So one way of saying is that. The other one is saying, we hear the word attachment and aversion, but they have got levels and levels. So you can't, it's like you can see the grossest level of dirt, but you can't see the subtlest level. You're going to need a microscope to see the subtlest level. So if you can just imagine attachment and aversion, this pair that are running the show for us. We're going between these like drunken sailors 1,000 times a day, instantly wanting the nice thing and then upset and distressed or angry or depressed when it does, and they build up. So these become ever more subtle. As you at the first level, you get a bit of control. Then you get more and more and more as you progress. All I can do is say it that way. You get more and more aware of your mind, more and more, you see more and more subtle levels of attachment. It'd be an amazing, to be free of attachment, well before the end result. You can't imagine how astonishing you'd be. You'd be an extraordinary, unusual human being. So I'm just giving you, I'm saying some words. Can you hear me?
Yes. When Buddha was almost reaching enlightenment and Mara came in at the end.
Sorry, what?
When Buddha was nearly reaching enlightenment and Mara came in at the end, that was really strong there. That didn't sound very subtle to me.
But that wasn't, but I know, but I don't get those stories. I mean, I hear them and all these dramas and Mara coming with all this and that. I mean, I don't know, I sort of read that and go, yeah, it's all very nice. Sounds like a fairy story for children or something. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic here, I'm a bit cynical. Those stories, I don't know. It's not his mind. It's just, I don't know, it's just a teaching or something. I can't imagine, I mean...
But there were still traces of that somehow.
Yeah, but I mean, if we really realise what enlightenment meant, come on, it's not possible. I don't know those stories. I don't get them. I don't know what to say. My view, I don't know what to say. I read them in the Bible. I love reading. We do our pilgrimage every year. We go to India and Nepal. Since 2001, I've been leading a pilgrimage. This is a commercial break now. Stuck into the evening. Every year since 2001, we've been leading a pilgrimage to the places of the Buddha to raise money for a liberation prison project. Now, it's about my 16th. It's in October this year. I'm still not bored by them. I love going to these places. Now it started so long, I forgot what I said it. What was I about to say? The pilgrimages to India and Nepal. Oh yeah, in the bus we have, the last 2 weeks, the last 10 days we're in India in our bus. So it's amazing in these buses travelling. We go 8 hours from Lumbini to Shravasti and then another 8 hours to this place, Kushinagar, the places where Buddha passed away, blah, blah. It's a wonderful experience. People love it. And we read these, on the bus, we read different books. So one of them we have this lovely biography of the Buddha. And every time I read, I get annoyed with all these stories, I'm trying, it sounds so dramatic and all Mara coming, all this thing in Rhino, all that. It does seem very nice, but I don't know. That's all I was trying to get, but we've got a way to get a commercial in. I don't know about those stories. I don't know, but we understand how subtle, more subtle. Yes. I mean, for me, for sure, for a person like me, who was very volatile, my nature's speedy and kind of energetic, and that expressed as anger as a child. Enormous, huge, vast. The millisecond my attachment didn't get what it wanted, you could never doubt. It was like violent, explosive, angry, shouting, yelling, kicking, do you understand? Out of control. So I can see over the years, and that's where I find it very fascinating, that it's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like your question was so perfect, because it seems as if, it's only the internal and the external doesn't matter. That's not the point. Or equally here, we conflate, for example, anger with action. And I remember one person saying to the Dalai Lama, a journalist, when anger looks really good, it forces you to act and to help others. And that we really get that when it comes to like political action, But I think we're conflating the action energy with anger. So if you think you're going to stop being angry, you throw the baby out with the bathwater and become passive. That's not also what Buddha's saying. You're not saying this now. But these levels, to know your mind well in the Buddhist view, is to have this real skill to distinguish between what seems a good quality of anger, which is action, and the rubbish one, which is the fury and the criticism and the wish to harm. We get rid of that. And I can see for myself, because I'm that type of person, I really had a sense when I first became a Buddhist I'd get sort of, I thought, when we misinterpret mindfulness and we're going to walk slowly and be these sweet little passive people, I thought, I can't be a Buddhist if it has to be the way it is. It's ridiculous. So we have to learn to hear, to look into ourselves and know the neurotic aspect of something. So equally, you can see a person who's really patient. Patience is the most miraculous quality. I just admire patient people. A patient person would be a person who, when a bad thing happens, it doesn't give them a panic attack, basically. That's what patience is. That's an incredible quality. But a person who's patient, the negative side of it is they can also be passive and put up with things they shouldn't put up with. So it's a really fine skill, because the words seem easy: give up anger, give up attachment. We can easily throw the baby out with the bathwater, People get all, oh, I'm a practitioner, would like some tea, Robina? Oh no, I've given up attachment. Would you like coffee, sugar, anything? Oh no, I don't mind. Well, that's indifference. That's kind of boring, and that's not what Buddha's saying. I know you're not discussing this now, but for me, this is a really powerful point. That's why I love the Dalai Lama. Anyone can see he's kind of charismatic and powerful and talks fast and walks fast. He does. And so you have this cliche view of being a Buddhist, being mindful and slow. I mean, he fails. But anyone can see he's a happy, smiling, funny, wonderful, compassionate person. So it's for me almost a relief to have a person like that. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Maybe, possibly. So it's just the skill is knowing the words first, knowing the theories. It's like anything. You know Bach's theories. You play it once and you say, oh, I got it, that's really nice. But then, you play it for the next 50 years and you keep getting better at it, and ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. And you really can't talk about the subtler because you've got to have the experience of it. Once you know the theories, what is attachment, what is aversion, get the theories clear. So the theories of Buddha, all these states of mind are actually conceptually based. They're conceptual stories. Whereas, like you said, and we think, they're emotions. But what's fascinating for the Buddhist view of the mind, and this is part of our problem, when we think of it as an emotion, that's when the body is involved. And that's when we notice it, and that's when the wheels are falling off. But that's only when we notice what's going on, when the wheels are falling off, when the body is involved. When a person is angry, they're shouting, the eyes are wide, the spit's coming out the mouth, that's, oh wow, look at that, she's having an emotion. But what about the person who doesn't express it very much, but they maybe know their mind? And I use the example, if you, like say, recorded a person having an angry fit and then wrote the words down on a piece of paper, because all they're doing is shouting words. You wrote the words they're saying on a piece of paper. Then another person who doesn't ever shout but knows their mind writes down all their angry thoughts. You've got 2 bits of paper with angry thoughts on them, and maybe even the person who never shouts, maybe their words are even more crazy, more angry, more violent. So the real point the Buddha's making, we only get to see this when we start to meditate and go deep inside, that these emotions, as we call them, they're just the tip of the iceberg. They're the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. That's the wheels falling off, and we only notice it then. Whereas we really have to learn to notice the thought, the conceptual stories, the elaborate, distorted, embellishing conceptual stories that are the neurotic, deluded, negative ones. They're conceptions, they're thoughts. And when we can get to see our mind at that level, then we can unpack and unravel fairly easily and change the thoughts before it becomes emotional. And I can say that, I'm not saying I'm a great practitioner, I am not saying that, but I can say with certainty, anger being my one, for example, anger, strong, volatile response when I didn't get what I wanted. Over the years, having the view of karma, that's a very powerful view for me, I find it very extremely helpful. The explanation of why things happen, Buddha's view, and then understanding my mind to some degree, based on studying the Buddhist model of the mind. Then over the years, what changes isn't just that you sort of suppress your response to this bad thing, but I see that I no longer have that view at all about that bad thing. It's my view of it that's changed. And that's what Buddha's saying. It's a viewpoint. All the stuff in here is a viewpoint. So you're not suppressing it. We have 2 methods in our world. We vomit it all out, or we live in denial. The Buddha's one is this super sophisticated ability to see your mind more deeply, go beyond the emotional component, beyond the physical component, to get to the conceptual level, which is extremely subtle. And then to hear all these raging conceptual stories under there, and then reconfigure them. Literally be your own therapist. Literally reconfigure the stories, reinterpret things. So I would say for sure for me, the bit of progress I've done with a little bit, you know, that the things that would have made me angry once don't make me angry anymore because I've changed my interpretation of them. That's what the anger is. It's an interpretation. It's a conceptual story. When we get to see that, we really understand Buddhist psychology. You know? Any other questions? Points to bring up?
Could you say something, please, about a strong emotion such as grief?
Now, that's a very fascinating one, you know, because if you look at the list, you know, when you study the Buddhist model of the mind in the monasteries, it's the same one that they studied 2,500 years ago. And in all the Buddhist traditions, whether it's the Theravadan countries or the Mahayana, the texts are the same. And they have this, you know, these thousands of states of mind. But there's this particular text that's taught that's called in Tibetan Lorig, mind and awareness. And it's a presentation both of the epistemological model of the mind, but also the psychological model. And it's in the second one, the psychological, it's describing the contents of the mind. Well, as I said, Buddha says there's 84,000 distinct different delusions. Forget the virtues. But this text just covers 51 different states of mind. So in that list, if you look, there's no term for grief. So what I think we have to unpack it. And my sense is, just a little, if I think about it, taking the Buddhist view of the deluded neurotic states of mind and then the valid ones, there's a mixture. So I remember, the Dalai Lama, for example, he cried, when he talked about his mummy dying, he would cry. And that would seem like what we call grief. But it wouldn't last long, and he'd be cracking jokes again. So it wasn't like as if his heart had been ripped out. So you could say with him, it was just pure compassion. He thought of his mother, he was grateful for her kindness, and the sadness of not seeing her there. That can be a totally valid response, even including tears. It's not suffering. It's not suffering at all. So we would have that too with grief. Because first of all, the close karmic connection. If your beloved baby dies, your beloved husband leaves you or dies, either way. It's the karmic connection, first of all, which is really close. Got this strong connection, this familiarity with each other. And then there's the attachment, of course. That's the main source of the pain. Isn't it? Because attachment is the need to have the person there, the thinking about them all the time, the believing they belong to me, and then the ache and the pain and the tragic loss of not having. That's the real pain. But that plus compassion will be what we have called grief. So if the compassion and some sense of some sense of a person who's done a bit of practice, the attachment would eventually go, and you'd stop suffering. But often what happens, I think, people feel guilty about stopping suffering. So you kind of feel you've got to keep being miserable that the husband died, you know. You feel guilty because you don't seem to, the pain seems to heal. So I think it's a mixture of attachment and the good qualities. And if it's really mostly only attachment, you'll never heal. I remember meeting a guy a few years ago whose wife had died like 5-10 years before, and he was still utterly bereft, broken-hearted, thinking and talking about her the whole time. Now that's pure attachment, not criticizing anyone. So it has to be attachment there, and the karmic connection, and just the play and the sadness, and that's valid. This human being whom you adored is no longer there, and that's rejoicing in their good qualities, isn't it? So then when the more we realize impermanence, then that's what we would heal. We'd heal quite quickly and not have this guilt about not suffering. Does that make sense? The way of saying it? Yeah. Yes.
I went to a funeral of a Tibetan person when I was in Dharamsala, and I felt quite emotional because my grandfather had died, and I started to cry, and this Tibetan person next to me, who was a friend of mine, looked really surprised. And he said, "What's the matter with you today?"
Right.
And I was just sort of overwhelmed with the fact that this lovely Tibetan man had died tragically as well. And they were all really close friends of this person, but none of them were crying.
They weren't crying.
Just the two Westerners that were there cried, me and another Westerner.
I understand. So how did you interpret that? What did you think? What did you think was going on? What's your interpretation of that? What did you think?
Their focus of his passing was on rejoicing his life and making strong prayers for him
For the
his
future.
rebirth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But maybe some people would cry. I mean, like the mother, perhaps.
Yeah.
Very close friends.
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, his holiness cried, tears coming out when he was talking about his mum one time. I understand your point. No, I think this is the thing again. If you take the Buddha's view, It's all conceptual. It's all conceptual. I mean, if you really have the view, and it's in your practice, and you think it's your hypothesis that the consciousness continues after, then you would really be focusing on that. You really would be. I mean, it's interesting because I edit some books sometimes, and one of Lama's Opus books, it's about death. It's how to help at the time of death. And it's very, I mean, I do use it for courses all over the world, and people somehow love the Buddha's view about the mind. I know funeral directors come, all kinds of people come, Christians come, because they somehow like the Buddha's view about death. It's interesting, and reincarnation. Somehow there seems to be so much details about it, especially in the Tibetan Buddhist, the Vajrayana tradition. So in the book, I remember it's all about how to help at the time of death. So the first part is, the 2/3 of it are really just the practices, all the different sutras and practices and mantras and prayers that you could select, like in this little handbook of practices, 2/3 of it's that. But the first part of it is the practical explanation of what death is, what happens, the death process, how to meditate on it, all the different things you can do to help your loved ones the weeks and months before death, what you can talk about, what you can pray about, the sutras you can read, a whole bunch of advice, lots and lots and lots of advice. And it's all about the book is framed in terms of you helping your loved one. Clearly you've got to learn it for yourself, then you can help. In fact, as Lama's Opus says, he said, if you want to help anyone in this life, when they need you most is at the time of death. So hearing that, you've got to have a reference. For a Westerner, that's a weird idea. That's the time they don't need you, they're nearly dead. And that's because you've got the view that their consciousness is the brain, and when they're dead, they're dead. So as soon as you have the view that the mind continues, already you see it differently. So I remember a friend of mine proofreading the book, and she said, where's the chapter about grief? I said, this book's not about us, this is about the person dying. So remember, all the practices do weeks and months before, hours, days before, hours before, when the breath stops, after the breath stops, 3 days, then the 49 days, and even after that. So half of Rinpoche's techniques are for when the person's dead, Which doesn't exist for us, it's all about us then. And mostly, even when we talk about it in the West, it's all about us. So there's not even that approach. That's another discussion. That's for us to work with, It's how to help the person die well so they get another decent human rebirth. So it's a very different framework. Very different, isn't it? Yeah. And that's based on a philosophical view, isn't it? Your assumptions about things, isn't it? It's very interesting, actually, now talking about it. I remember at the time I was doing this book, I happened to read a book by an American medical journalist. He's a very funny fellow, very funny, very good, very funny. He's an atheist, he said, but he had this really excellent book. He called it The Undead. It's not about zombies. It's about all the contradictions and problems and conflicts that's now occurring, that are occurring in the medical profession in America as a result of the business of giving organs. Utter confusion now, when is life and when is death, which is actually very good that people are discussing it, So, as we all know, the Buddhist view would be, especially the Vajrayana model, that when you stop breathing, you're not dead yet, your subtle consciousness is still there, and it can take up to 3 days to leave, So he said there's so many obstacles, and so many problems, because people coming back to life. I mean, this is really common in the world, in all cultures, where people report people coming back to life. But if you've got the materialist view, you can't answer that, so it's a puzzle. But this is becoming very evident in people's experiences. They're ready to cut the liver out and the person comes back to life, for God's sake, So different things like this. So he said, even one man was reported, one of the doctors, he said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that much I can say. So I think it's really excellent. He had a whole chapter, he's a very funny man. He had a whole chapter on what we call out-of-body experiences, all for people having their operations. Well, technically, they're not leaving their body. You just have the experience of it. If you left your body, you'd be dead. It's your subtle mind, which is the same consciousness we have when we dream. We had a whole chapter on very vivid experiences of people on the operating table. Well, of course, mostly the medical profession are cynical about that. That's not possible. Don't be ridiculous. But he quoted one woman who he said had to have such a radical procedure that they had to stop all her organs or whatever, all her vital things, and there could be no way from their point of view that she could be conscious of anything. But she reported the most vivid experience of watching every single thing, knowing exactly what they said, what the instruments they used. You can't argue with this, So these things, incidentally, I think, are so good that there are these discussions now. That's why the Dalai Lama's meetings this last 30, 40 years with all the best brains in the West on these very things. And Dalai Lama said in Dharamsala last year, I think, he joked, all his scientist friends, they've created these special certain kind of technology they put on the brain and the brain and the nervous system of the yogis who meditate after they've died. They stay in their bodies for days, some of them, meditating, looking like they're dead, of course, from the Western view. So they have these machines, but he said the technology, they haven't got enough of it, because when the yogi dies in the south of India and the machine's in Dharamsala, by the time they get it there, the person's left his body, so he has to have more machines, he said, But it's marvellous that these things are happening, really questioning the assumptions about what consciousness is, It's very interesting. But one interesting report, one nurse reported, the nurse who monitors the heartbeat of the dead person. Because when you stop breathing, that's when they keep you breathing, keep your heart going, keep your lungs going. You look all warm and toasty like a living person. They think you're dead, but the Buddha's view is very clear. And in this book, I asked him to check questions, and he answers, of course you're alive still. Your subtle consciousness is there. You couldn't get a real dead body to breathe. Not possible, So this woman, the nurse, there's this woman who was giving her organs. She was all toasty and warm, and the breathing was happening. But in Buddhist view, her gross consciousness had ceased. Her senses had ceased. But her subtle consciousness must be still there. So she's on the table, and the nurse noted the heartbeat, that when they got that circular saw ready to cut her from head to toe, the nurse noticed that the heartbeat went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author wondered why a dead person had to be anxious about. Well, what I can speculate on this one, that the people on the operating table, they're alive people, right? But they're under anaesthetic, aren't they? That means they're unconscious, which is like sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be exactly the same as a person whose first stages of death has occurred, but they've stopped breathing altogether, but their subtle consciousness is still there, which is like the dream mind. So in the same way that people, I remember in a retreat I did years ago in Dharamsala, we did a 3-month retreat. I'm not a meditator, but something has to happen if you're there for 3 months, isn't it? So something, my mind, I had these dreams, vivid dreams. We'd have a nap at lunchtime. So I had these vivid dreams, but I was completely conscious of all the things going on around me, or hearing it. And people report that, and that's a similar thing of having an out-of-body experience, but mine wasn't as dramatic. So this woman, I would deduce that because she's still alive, but her gross consciousness had ceased, she wouldn't be feeling it, but she would have been observing like a person who's on the operating table. And so it's her subtle consciousness, and because she still knows who she is, she's having a panic attack because don't they realise I'm not dead yet? They're cutting me open already. And that could be a not cool way to die, That could change the karma, right? So I thought it was very interesting. What has a dead person got to be anxious about, he said. So it's very interesting. He was quite cynical about the whole profession, actually. Quite cynical in many ways. Problems that are arising, which is probably good because they're forcing them to look at their own assumptions, It's very interesting. And in many countries now, the default is that you will give your organs unless you sign otherwise. It's very wicked. It's very, very manipulative, isn't it? Wow. Anyway, blah, blah. Any other questions? How are we going? We can go home now if you like. It's 25 to 9. I talk fast, so it's probably like 10 p.m. No, I'm serious. I always say this. It must be boring people who've heard me say it before. I'm so stupid. I say it all the time. But in Queensland, years ago, I must have said this 100 times, this story. It must be very boring if you've heard it before. In Queensland, in Brisbane, we have a monastery, we have nuns there, and in the centre up north, beyond there, and then in Brisbane, Miffy, or somebody then, invited 3 of us nuns from the nunnery to give talks on a Tuesday night for 90 minutes. So they transcribed them. And the other 2 nuns were 8 pages and mine were 24. So you got your money's worth. It's now about, it's 3 times, it's now about 11 p.m, okay? So you can go, must be very boring. I keep saying that stupid story. Okay. And what other questions? Come on, you people. What else? Anything. Doesn't matter. Don't have to. Enough is enough. I can rabbit on. Doesn't matter. I'm happy to talk.
Well, can you give us a kind of vivid example of how grasping and aversion work in really...
In daily life.
Yeah.
Yeah, even the mild version, a really mild version. If you can think of this attachment, we often say, but what am I attached to? It's just a default assumption that I must get only the nice things. It's the best way to put what attachment is, and it's just totally there like a motor driving us automatically. So there's an assumption that I must only have the nice things. Can you hear that? Mm-hmm. If you can understand attachment at that level, then the millisecond something goes wrong. I use a dumb example. You're doing the dishes and you drop a cup. I don't know anybody who does that who doesn't get upset. Now, upset is a very mild version of anger, which is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Attachment just wants everything to be perfect. That's what attachment is. So that's an example of attachment not getting what it wants. But who looks at that? Who thinks that's a problem? Nobody. We only wait till someone chops your finger off that you've got a problem. Can you hear me? This is happening all the time, all day. And then, of course, we get annoyed with ourselves, but we don't rectify it. We don't fix it. We don't say, that's okay, Robina, drop another one, darling, it's cool. Doing that is being your own therapist. You just saw the aversion arise and you argue with it and calm it down. Then that means you solve that problem. Otherwise, it builds up as a moment of aversion, another moment, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. So the more we are aware of these baby things, don't wait for your wheels to fall off. Look at the baby things and catch it and argue with it. Notice what it was. Notice the response and give it a name. Is it jealous? Is it annoyed? Is it angry? And this is what keeps getting more subtle. I mean, this is gross still. This is a gross level still. But the subtlety of these delusions. You with me? This is every day, all day. So attachment is an assumption that I must get what I want every second. That's the way to say it. It sounds very brutal, but that's what it is. And it's desperate to get it can only bear the nice things. It can only bear the things that I think are the things that they ought. That's why we talk about a control freak. Talk about all these words we use. Control freak is a person who, all their attachment energy is kind of, attachment energy is also kind of creative energy. So the action energy, want to make everything perfect. It's got to be all perfect. Because attachment, so some people don't mind if it's messy, but people they're attached to something else. So attachment functions in different ways. But that's a classic example of this one. It always has to be perfect. And then, of course, no matter how perfect you get it, it's still never enough. That's attachment energy. It's the energy of always wanting only the nice things and can only bear the nice things. There's a panic attack if a nice thing doesn't happen. And that's 1,000, 2,000 times a day, every second in the mind. And that's subtle. We only notice it until, like I said, we only notice it when it's really extreme. Or until you can't get out of bed one morning. So what's depression? So there's anger, the most volatile level. Irritated, annoyed, frustrated, upset. They're all a spectrum of it. Of aversion. They're the milder ones which you don't pay attention to. Then you've got eventually, and it all builds up. You don't deal with it. And then there's eventually depression and despair. That's internalized aversion. So, a person who doesn't get angry, who doesn't just get volatile, but there's still the aversion is arising in the mind, but it's very small, and because we don't pay attention, we do not notice it until one day, 60 years later, you're in profound depression, you have to go to therapy for 10 years to sort it out. Do you understand? So this really sounds so deceptively simple. Attachment and aversion sounds so cute and boring, but it's got profound levels. And it's every second of the day. That's why to be free of attachment, you'd be a sublime person. You would only be loving. You'd only be compassionate. You could not, you'd be no other way. That would be just beyond belief. And what holds our compassion and love back is our attachment. Because we're frantic. I mean, the most gross level of attachment is to be in our comfort zone. Another way of putting it, we've got to be in our comfort zone. So even you have massive love and compassion for your most beloved child, but there's a breaking point. You've got to have your sleep. You've got to have a break. We go mad otherwise. That's because we have attachment. We think it's normal, but it's because we have attachment. If we didn't have attachment, nothing would ever exhaust you. Nothing would ever stress you. That's literally true, but we can't imagine that in modern psychology. There's no equivalent concept. Do you understand? That's how you'd be. So this is why to use the Buddha's view of this distinction, this utter distinction between the neurotic states of mind and the valid ones, then this really has meaning, So we're trying to grow the virtues. You'd be more loving, more wise, more brave, more courageous, more optimistic. Nothing would drag you down. You still might need to sleep, but your mind would not change. And so, Dalai Lama, they say he's a Buddha. I can't say he is a Buddha, but they say he's a Buddha. But look at the example on this planet, I mean, look at the drama of his life. All his people still being slaughtered. His country utterly destroyed. He's their mummy, he's their daddy. 60 years, though, he has never stopped. That's why you don't just become passive. He's never stopped trying to change things. But he's always optimistic, always positive. No matter how bad things get, he doesn't get dragged down. Because you have to deduce he hasn't got attachment. So such a good example, such a living example, if we can think of it in that way. You know? That's what we're capable of, one step at a time. Got to know our limits.
I can get very depressed and despairing
Yes.
about
The world.
the world problems.
That's right, darling.
The
Exactly.
climate,
That's it. Absolutely.
all the violence that's going
Exactly,
on.
darling. That's exactly right.
And to the point where I can't find any way
Exactly.
to feel there's any hope. I think,
Exactly.
you know, okay, what for a start, if I would, God, goodness knows how many lifetimes get enlightened to help
Yeah.
sentient beings.
Exactly.
It feels too
I understand,
little,
darling.
too late.
I understand.
The whole planet's being
I understand,
destroyed.
darling. I understand. So, okay, let's just look at how, just say the theories, and we know them. Let's just say them, though, the Buddhist view. Well, first of all, universes and suffering and happiness are beginningless. And that's the nuttiest idea we've ever heard. Your mind is beginningless. Suffering is beginningless. Universes are beginningless. Realms of existence are beginningless. As nutty as that sounds to us, we all have this frantic, utter belief that there was a beginning somewhere. And the Buddha will say that's a consequence of one of the main wrong views of permanence and no cause and effect. Because if you have the law of cause and effect, you cannot have a first anything. So Christians deal with it by positing God. I'm not being rude. But, as Dalai Lama said, we're all looking for the first Big Bang, in other words. He said, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So there's been beginningless minds, beginningless suffering, beginningless realms of existence, beginningless consciousness. Necessarily matter and mind have to be beginningless. And they're also endless. That's one thing. So then, he says he has found the method to rid the mind of all the rubbish and grow all the goodness, to become omniscient, which means his consciousness is pervading the universe, with consciousness is not physical. So we're talking your potential as well. The mind, when it's enlightened, pervades the existence, knows that which exists, has infinite empathy, no longer a separate sense of self, which is the combination of this incredible compassion and, if you're a bodhisattva path, life after life after life after life of this courageous attitude of bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness is there, the wisdom is there, but this extra level of compassion, or you just only wish to work for others. So suffering is unbearable. Life is endless and beginningless. But because you don't have delusions, you don't have any attachment, any aversion, any fears, any drama, there is no choice but to keep helping. And that's what keeps them, this massive, brave attitude of optimism. Not hope as you said. Hope is when you don't have it. Hope is when you don't know botany and you hope your seed grows. But if you know botany, you don't hope your seed grows. You make sure it will grow. So that's the clarity that Buddhism has. The Buddha has this world view that explains the universe, understands the universe, knows what the mind is, knows what things are. So you don't have to have hope or fear. You have optimism and you're realistic. And then the interesting thing too, when you've got the bodhisattva path, or the compassion even, then the more suffering you see, the more wisdom you have, the more courage you have to help. So think of this. Let's say you're really compassionate about suffering, about, say, people in a war zone and they're injured. And there's a tent there where all the doctors sans frontières are there working away. You understand? With their scalpels and their God knows what. So you walk in and all you can do is put a Band-Aid on something. You have no wisdom when it comes to being a doctor. You're with me? Yeah. So you see the suffering, you will go mad, won't you? Because you don't know how to help. But if you're a surgeon, you will focus and you'll be so clear. You see the nightmare, but you've got the method to help. That's what wisdom brings. So compassion without wisdom will make you insane. Yeah. That's the wisdom which is fundamental, which means knowing why and what and karma and the mind, and that gives steel and power and courage to your compassion. Do you understand? Yeah. And that means learning about karma and the mind. They're the nuts and bolts of Buddha's view. Then there's no choice. The Bodhisattva's job description, it is my job to help others. And everyone who come along, and the more suffering they see, the more courage they get. So we have to, according to our own capacities, we go. You understand? Yeah. And the main reason to, I'd say, if we've got the philosophical materialist view, which is the prevailing view on our planet, we don't have answers to why there's all the suffering, do we? Not being rude about science, but there aren't answers. Now, if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you do have answers. You know God's got a plan. I think this is pretty profound, actually. And different Christians argue with me about this, but it seems to me if I've got faith in a creator, the creator is perfect. He has made the universe. He is omniscient. He's got a plan. That's what God is. So if you have faith in God, you'll be fine because God knows what he's doing. But with the materialist view, no one knows what they're doing. And Buddha says, well, karma is a view, you know, so there's explanations of it. And clarity about why things happen is the wisdom that we need, that gives us the courage to persevere. So one step at a time, honey, according to our pace. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, it's no point in saying, why despair, because we can't help it. But it's like, the optimism I'm talking about, we have to develop, is even, I joke and say, even if you're drowning, you might as well stay perky, because you might find a method to get out of it. But if you start panicking, you're lost. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what Dalai Lama's example. 60 years he hasn't stopped. He has not stopped, and he will not stop. Every method possible. Diplomatic, social, political, every way. Science, religion, every way possible. Never gives up. That's coming from wisdom. So as the Dalai Lama says, compassion's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. Whereas Lama Zopa says, meaning well's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And wisdom is coming from karma and understanding the mind and eventually realizing emptiness. Cutting all the nonsense and the fears, Do you understand? Yeah. All we can do is keep moving, one step at a time. That'll do. Let's finish. Go to bed. Let's keep moving, one step at a time. Never give up, okay? One step at a time. No matter how bad it gets, just pick yourself up and keep going. That's the courage we need, That's the optimism. That's the optimism. Pick yourself up and just keep going. Now, let me finish with one story. I always tell this story these days. This woman and people I work with. I worked for years with people in prison. Still know many friends in prison. I stopped running the project 10 years ago. But there's one woman I didn't meet, but she's quite well known now. People know her name. What's her name? I forget her name now. She's American. She's based in Ireland now. She's married to an Irishman. She was hitching in Florida in the 70s with a hippie husband, hippie children. And they got picked up by two guys, and then the guys killed the two police, and then they got blamed. The hippies got blamed, so they're on death row. I mean, you can't imagine the nightmare. I mean, you're accused of breaking a cup, you get upset. They're accused of murdering two police, and in America, killing police are the worst of the worst animals on the planet. Death row. He gets executed. Even the husband gets executed. You can't imagine the nightmare. The children, their 3 children, I think, were given to her family, her parents. They died in a car accident. Like, you can't imagine the pain. You can't imagine the nightmare. Talk about suffering. But this woman, I don't know her well. I've seen her and read a bit about her. She has to have some extraordinary quality, some extraordinary intelligence, She did yoga and stuff. I don't know much more about her. But she said at some point, she realized, I can't change anything. But they can't take my mind from me. So I decided I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. So the point about her, I mean, that's just extraordinary that you can have that will, that ability to do that. And that has to mean she's got some extraordinary kind of patience. So I think if you've got strong anger, that's when you go mad. And this is really simple in that. Psychologically, we make it so complicated. But anger is so evident. Anger is the most destructive, most appalling, most shocking. First, for yourself, the suffering is unbearable. And then look at what we do on the basis of it, She mustn't have had anger, that's all. A person who thinks that way has to have not much anger. And the unbelievably brave attitude, brave mind, to change her interpretation of her situation. So the interesting point, because of that, she still never gave up working for her freedom. If she got out of her mind, she'd just be sitting there overwhelmed by pain. She did nothing, but she managed eventually to get her freedom. Then she went to some Amnesty International conference in Ireland and met this Irish fellow who'd been accused of murdering 2 British policemen during the Troubles. And then now they're living together, running a retreat centre in Ireland for prisoners who've come out of prison who are wrongly accused. I mean, the sweetest, dearest people, human beings. But that's, for me, just a classic, perfect example, extreme example of really the Buddha's approach to life. I'm not saying she's a Buddhist. That's why I'm saying Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He's just very good at it. Do you understand? So we'll finish with that optimistic point. We can change our minds, babies. That's the one. I'm keen to success. Okay, so I'll sing a little prayer, ending it like 2 little bookends. We started with a motivation, now we end up with a dedication. Thinking as many moments as there have been, there's as many seeds been planted in our mind, how fantastic. Nothing goes astray. So maybe each of us nourish these seeds with our practice from this moment forward, whatever practice it is, that's our business, to develop our amazing potential for our sake and the sake of others. Never give up. Kewadin yududar lama sangge drugyu drowa chikyang malupa dei sala kupasho jangchob semchog rinpoche ma kie panam ke gyuchig kie panyam pa me payang gong ne gong du pa ba sho. Okay. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you very
Robina.
Good night. You're going to take this moment? Come on, Linda. She's my guide.
Lucky girl.